We've tackled tackling, we've taken a position on positioning, and now it's time to jump into jumping. Yes, the third part of what was originally going to be a 3-part series, now 4, we're going to look at jumping reach because it was so effective last year, see if it's still very powerful this year, also to see if they've balanced it with the heading attribute, which got a little left behind, and also how much height matters in this scenario. It's a bumper set of experiments. If you haven't watched the first 3 videos in this investigative series, then they will be linked below. And for those that are joining us here for this particular video, just a rundown of how this works. Here we have Max Kilman, one of our selected test subjects. We have taken 4 players from the 4 teams, predicted 201 at the beginning of the season, around that 12th, 13th mark in the season preview, and we have given them 15 in everything except for set-piece related ones. We have got Max Kilman here from Wolves at centre-back, left-back Rico Henry from Brentford, defensive midfielder Cheick Doucouré at Crystal Palace, and winger Harry Wilson from Fulham, because of course this all began with the insane tackling statistics for wingers, which, yes, spoilers, is a thing and is the problem. However, in Harry Wilson's case, he does have 15 in some of the set-piece ones because he had them before and it felt wrong to take them away from him. But for this particular experiment, we'll be taking one of these 15s and turning them to 1. So in this case, we'll turn 15 heading to 1 heading, we'll turn 15 jump and reach to 1 jump and reach, and as of right here, you can see I have given Max Kilman a height of 6'6" for the height experiment. This is loaded up off that one, where we have given all of them 6'6". I've also sort of averaged out the hidden attributes and reduced their injury chances to 1, so they never get injured. But let's get into the actual results and just a quick reminder of the general gist of things on the control variables, which was just their normal heights and 15 and everything as pictured there. So Max Kilman, 6'4" still, admittedly in that regard, but this is his control results for that, and then Henry's, Doucouré's and Wilson's. Overall, Wilson's the best tackler. When you factor in the overall percentage rate and the amount the tackles they do per game, it's between the fullbacks and the wingers. Basically on the sides, that's where all the tackles happens. Fouls-wise, it gets increasingly more the further forward you get. Interception-wise, mostly fullbacks. Possession 1 though, mostly centre-backs. We still don't know what this mystery metric actually covers, because it certainly isn't entirely dependent on interceptions or tackles, because Kilman makes less interceptions per game and less tackles per game, yet still comes out with 21, nearly 22 possession ones per game compared to Henry's nearly 16. So I don't know what this is covering, and it's been the big mystery in this whole set of experiments. Header percentages generally go down the less centre-back you get, and the same with key headers. But that might also be factored into Kilman's height, who is notably taller than all of the others in this as a baseline. So 1 heading, how much does that affect things, and is it more powerful than jumping reach, which very much took the headlines last year? And of course, as a reminder, this is 15 in an attribute versus 1. We're taking it all the way to the extreme. You'll be very rarely, obviously, trying to judge between 15 and a 1 on a player. It'll typically be between like 13 and 15 or 12 and 14 or something like that. This is the extreme. And of course, this is the heading experiment as well, but I have included all the other defensive statistics just to see what happens, really. Curiously, 1 heading reduces the ability to tackle across the board except for Doucouré. Doesn't change Doucouré's ability to tackle, but it just reduced Max Kilman's, Rico Henry's, and Harry Wilson's ability to tackle by a noticeable amount. And in the case of the 2 defenders as well, the number of tackles per 90 go down as well. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Fouls sort of stay in the roughly similar areas. As do interceptions. It feels like perhaps maybe a rogue 94 interceptions on Max Kilman's controls versus a rogue maybe 58 is what's kind of driving the major difference there. I'm not fully convinced that it's changed the total number of interceptions average. It's just that we had an outlier on the high side and we've had an outlier on the low side. But I don't know what the variations on these to sort of confidently say these are absolutely outliers. But I suspect, judging by the others who are similar across the board, within sort of 2 points of each other pretty much, that is what's happened there. Meanwhile, possession 1, similarly, stays roughly the same. 3 consistent years, because it's all 1 year simulation, but so yeah, 3 consistent years under 20, which they didn't have before on Max Kilman's front, does imply there is something dropping by about 2-ish overall on average in possession 1, whereas the other 3 kind of stay roughly the same. And I wonder if it's harsh here, this, because it's only 0.13 for tackles per 90, so that doesn't add up to 2, obviously. So there is something dropping, and I won't be surprised if there is a marginal drop in interceptions, perhaps. That is what's driving this possession 1. It's not a huge difference, though. But the obvious thing that you would expect from heading going to 1 is a reduction in heading. Surprise, surprise, it's a thing. Not as much as you would expect, actually, considering the fact that he was a 6'4" centre-back with 15 heading here. 71% was his average before, only drops to 64 for the centre-back. His key headers go up on average, which is odd. And it has to be said, the number of key headers per 90 remains roughly the same for all of them, but the number of headers won goes down across the board. It's actually a more significant drop for the left back, for the defensive midfielder, but not for Harry Wilson, who doesn't have a high standard to begin with. So actually he lost 13% heading on Henry and nearly 17% off Doucouré. Heading matters a lot for left backs and defensive midfielders. Weirdly, not so much for the centre-back. Still noticeable though. And again, this is 15 versus 1. As for jumping reach has a bigger effect on the ability to tackle. And this is driving a tiny bit of a thought experiment. Is heading included in the tackle percentage? Because why would not being able to jump affect the ability to put a foot in? Because it is a more significant drop for the centre-back by 7%, 3 more percent than one heading did, and notably, almost as much as one tackling did, which was 10%, and has a similar effect on Wilson as well, who had almost as much percentage drop in tackling. I think it was about 8% drop on one tackling for Wilson. It is a 10% drop for one jumping with Wilson. One jumping reduces Wilson's ability to tackle more than one tackling did, whereas for Doucouré, the defensive midfielder, doesn't make a difference. And for Henry, it's about the same as one heading, about 3%. It's noticeable, but it's about 3%. Number of tackles kind of stays the same, but sort of within the realms of the percentage drops for the just overall tackles. So that kind of tracks. Fouls stay roughly the same, although Kilman's do go up noticeably, and they did go up slightly on the one heading, but interceptions go down. And this does actually lead me to believe that interceptions include headed interceptions, of course, only for the centre-back. In fact, Doucouré's went up a little bit, but that might be driven by maybe an anomalous 38 on the original control. Possession 1 is basically the same across the board, except for the same marginal drop for Kilman as one heading did. And the header percentage goes down, by and large, to roughly the same marker point as one heading did. About 63% for Kilman, 58% for Henry, 44, 45, and 34, 35 for Wilson. Similar areas of drop from one heading to one jumping reach. So obviously combined, I suspect they'll have a obviously cumulative effect there. But what does happen is, in jumping reach's case, they do lose key headers per 90, especially when they're not a centre-back. Like effectively, no jumping reach on a non-centre-back just straight up eliminates key headers for the most part. Doucouré's goes from 0.45 to essentially 0, and Wilson's negligible one to begin with becomes essentially 0 as well. Henry's is cut to a third as a fullback. Kilman's does drop by about a third. It's kind of surprisingly not as much as you'd think. So conclusions off these two attributes, yeah, they both matter. Heading and jumping reach are probably the most important attributes we've tested so far in terms of what they actually lose. I'd argue anticipation is actually useful for basically everyone based on this possession 1, as is tackling for this kind of mystery effect on possession 1 as well, considering the fact it doesn't actually change your tackling ability all that much, but it does change something in possession 1. Meanwhile, possession 1 remains roughly the same with these ones, but heading and jumping reach both have a major effect on one's heading ability, as it should do. It's good to know that two attributes that should be doing something are doing the things they should be doing, unlike positioning, which does nothing. Although, actually, it is worth reminding, positioning does have an effect on key headers per 90 as well. A similar margins, actually, as one jumping reach. But it's the only thing positioning does. The numbers coming out of key headers per 90 are basically the same as one jumping reach to one positioning, which is slightly odd. As for height, I ran 5'10", 6'2", 6'6", but let's be honest, you're not really going to be considering defenders under 5'10". And if you are looking for an offensive player with heading, I haven't checked the number of goals scored for set pieces because I don't think I can actually access those metrics on a per player with the skin I'm using. I might have to find a new skin to find those stuff out. But similarly, you're not going to be going for an attacking player really with the intention of scoring headers under 5'10". So the upshot of this is same metrics, same test. Not a lot changes, but where it does change is interesting because Max Kilman and Henry's, the centre-back and left-backs, tackling ability doesn't change, but a taller defensive midfielder is worse at tackling, as is a taller winger. A 5'10" winger is better at tackling than a 6'2" and a 6'6" winger. And that is an anomalous result skewing things. All of the 5'10" tests were above 80, whereas most of the other ones skewed a bit lower. The 6'6" ones had one of the high ones and then a couple of 73s. There's much more variety there, whereas 6'2" was kind of consistently under 80 pretty much. So, and the same kind of consistent drop across the board, although a little bit more all over the place. Like there's an 82 in the 6'2's Doucourés, but 77, 73, 70. It is a natural decline the taller the defensive midfielder gets, which I don't understand. I wonder if it's actually genuinely running simulations in the AI of centre of gravity. Obviously, a shorter player will have a lower centre of gravity and maybe is better at tackling as a result. It doesn't track with the centre backs or the left backs on that front. So don't know what's going on there. Fouls stay same as you'd expect. Interceptions go up the taller a player is at centre back. Weirdly peak for a left back at 6'2", and then have no effect for Doucouré, and perhaps actually do go down, but that might be an anomalous 45 for Wilson on that last run there. Fairly consistently low, actually, on Wilson's at 6'6", so maybe there is a decline at 6'6" on that front. Bear in mind, they all have the same 15 in every other attribute, so it's 15 agility across the board as well. So they might be 6'6", but they've still got 15 agility. Possession 1 remains similar, not enough to call any trend there. As for headers, though, which of course is kind of the main thing in testing the height here, yeah, centre back, we can basically say no real effect. Left back, we can. For a left back, height matters. So we assume right back as well. But for a full back, it goes from 67 to 69, which isn't enough by itself to call this a trend, because that's within the realms of possibility, just statistical variance. However, then 6'6" left back has almost 75 heading percentage, which is a lot. It's more than the centre back, in fact. No real change for Doucouré or Wilson on that front. Like I say, so if this goes from 38 to 42, but then 6'6" is 39, so it feels like it's just random statistical variance that's a little bit more consistent in the middle of Wilson's 6'2" ones. But perhaps that is a little bit of a trend, and perhaps there's just sort of maybe anomalously low ones here that should be averaging higher than 40. But yeah, and then key headers, not a lot in it really. It's very hard to sort of read Wilson's in general on that front, just because of it being low in the first place. So kind of stay roughly the same, the key headers. So height seemingly doesn't affect things too much. I will say, when the 6'6" Kilmans started with 78-80, I thought something was happening. I thought there was going to be a trend here, and then it had 3 consistently low ones again. So, and it is worth saying, the 6'6" Kilman 71 average does tally with the 6'4" Kilman, which is his standard, on the control, which was 71.2. And obviously 75 for Henry. He's not 5'10" to begin with, I don't think, or might be around there to begin with. Nowhere near that, obviously, in the controls of anyone else's. Henry's control is still in this ballpark of 68, I think it was. So it's between these two. So that is an enormously high set of things. So extreme height for a fullback appears to be a thing, but not for anyone else. Obviously, I haven't tested it for strikers, but that's a different set of tests altogether. The odd thing here, actually, is that Kilman, Henry, and Wilson's control of their original heights is better than any of the runs on any of the heights with 50 and everything. I believe Wilson and Henry are shorter than 5'10" to begin with, but Kilman's 6'4" to begin with, so you'd think that Kilman's control would be somewhere in this area, and yet it's 82 on the average here. So maybe we actually got a high set of results on the original control for Kilman. So the conclusions we can draw from this experiment and this video: 1 heading and 1 jumping do exactly what you would think they would do, with the added effect of being worse than tackling overall for centre-backs and full-backs, but not massively so. Similarly, interceptions. Heading and jump reach matters effectively across the board, but mostly in the areas that you would think it would, in heading and all that. Height, at least between 5'10" and 6'6", I've not obviously tested extreme shortness, but again, you're not going to be looking at extremely short centre-backs typically, so I didn't include them in this video. But between the ranges that you would be finding centre-backs in and defensive players in typically, obviously defensive midfielders can run a lot lower in their average heights, and fullbacks can run a lot lower in their average height, so it might be well worth testing 5'6" maybe for them. Between 5'10" and 6'6", height doesn't matter unless you're a fullback, in which case, find yourself a tall fullback, because they run very similar numbers in every other respect, defensively, tackling, interceptions, fouls, all that jazz, but they are better, notably, at heading at 6'6". They are only ones that get more heading ability from being tall are fullbacks. get yourself a fullback with height, heading, and jumping reach, and then you're winning. But across this series, of course, we can also draw the conclusions that positioning doesn't matter all that much, but anticipation does. Tackling doesn't matter all that much, except for an area that we don't fully understand yet. So maybe it is well worth having tackling, anticipation, and heading and jumping reach. They're the 4 that I'm going to be taking forward going forward. Thank you for watching this. If you enjoyed this series, that is kind of the last in this one, unless you want me specifically to delve deeper and do a little bit more testing just to make sure I've got these conclusions right. For now, that's it for this particular run of experiments. Merry Christmas, of course, because this will likely be the last video I upload before Christmas, apart from maybe an Ascot update video, provided we get there in time. But there's a good chance this will be the last pre-Christmas video. So enjoy the holidays, everyone. And, well, hopefully this information was useful and you can enjoy your Football Manager over the festive period a little bit more now you know what actually matters. Thank you for watching. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this. Ta-ra.